Sunday morning on BBC One. Live now with Laura Kuenssberg.
Nicola Sturgeon, one of the most powerful people in the country for years, opens up today about her public shame and her private pain after her former husband pled guilty to embezzling £400,000 of the SNP's funds. There's anger.
I am not responsible for the crimes that my former husband committed, and I'm not going to apologise for somebody else's crimes.
But questions too about what she knew and her hurt on discovering that gifts she was given were paid for with money her husband stole.
Peter said to me, "I've got a surprise for you." And I saw you admiring this pendant and gave me it. Sorry. I loved that necklace and I wore it a lot.
And Labour's in a bit of a muddle. A former Labour Prime Minister, a current Labour Prime Minister, and two wannabe Labour Prime Ministers all set out their ideas this week. The Welfare Secretary, Pat McFadden, has worked with them all, but he might prefer to talk about his plans to get young people into work today. The Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, is with us with the Tories' new ideas for welfare too. And to chew it all over, the former Chancellor, Conservative Jeremy Hunt, broadcaster Asma Mir and Labour backbencher Rosanna Aline Khan are this week's team at the desk. Morning. Let's start, as we always do, with what is making the headlines this morning. Bad news for the Prime Minister about his beloved Arsenal. On the front of the Telegraph, his team didn't lift the big trophy last night, losing by penalties to Paris Saint-Germain. The Sunday Times splashes with that same photo and Jeremy Hunt's suggestion that the triple lock on pensions should be scrapped, and a claim that Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell, stole from Alex Salmond back in the 90s. The Observer's done a mash-up of Starmer, Blair and Andy Burnham, and I think that's Wes Streeting's chin somewhere, after all of their competing visions for politics were published this week. The Sunday Mirror says the government is going to ban social media for kids in a few weeks' time. And on the front of the Mail, Reform apparently asked Desert Island Discs if they would be interested in Nigel Farage, but they were told there was no space in this series, but maybe in the future. The paper claims he's been banned. But the offer of the interview here in this studio that he pulled out of a few weeks ago is, of course, still there, in the way that it is for all of the party leaders, including the Prime Minister, with whom there are one or two things to talk about these days. Let's then check in with our panel about our main event today, which is our interview with Nicola Sturgeon. Jeremy, she's been such a big figure for such a long time, and you crossed paths with her on many occasions when she was First Minister and you were in the Cabinet.
Yes, I mean, she is absolutely formidable as an operator, and what a horrible story this is. And it comes on the same day the Sunday Times are saying that Charlie Elphicke, the former Conservative MP who is disgraced, is now working as a builder in West London, and it just sadly reminds you that politics is a blood sport and it can be very, very brutal indeed.
Asma, for Nicola Sturgeon, though, this is both it's a personal story and a professional story, because she's always said she did nothing wrong, but she was the boss of the party during the period when much of this took place.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing as Jeremy was saying, that when you are in politics, it's relentless. There are very high standards, and if you are the leader of a political party and indeed the leader of a country, you have to be. You might be busy, but you have to be incredibly curious and incredibly across as much detail as you can to make sure that there is no scandal. And what's worrying for Nicola Sturgeon is that there's a poll in the Sunday Times, I think, is it not today, saying that only 20% of people believe that she did not know where the money for the stuff had come from.
Rosanna, one of the things that she has already hinted at, and we'll hear in a few minutes, is that her belief, though, that men and women will be treated differently when there's a scandal, that often women take the blame when men have done things wrong. Do you think that that is a defence for any kind of issue?
I do think that there is some truth in general that women are treated differently to men in circumstances where there has been wrongdoing, but I don't buy that at all in this set of circumstances. She was a huge national prominent figure. She was the leader of a party. She was one of the most powerful people in our nation. And I think that for hardworking MPs like myself and Jeremy, who go into work like hundreds of our colleagues, trustworthy, reliable, this is another kick in the teeth and, quite frankly, not really an excuse that we're buying.
OK, well, let's hear from her, then we'll be back with you in a few minutes' time. Scandal, sorrow and behaviour you might not believe. Many people were stunned this week by the news that the former boss of the SNP stole hundreds of thousands of pounds from the party, which he spent on a weird mix of things. Coffee machines worth thousands of pounds, even toilet seats, makeup, and that now notorious motorhome. And of course, Peter Murrell just happened to be Nicola Sturgeon's husband. The former First Minister, once a political star whose time in office ended with profound embarrassment and questions that have persisted about what she knew and how it could all have happened. Murrell pled guilty at the start of this week, but yesterday, for the first time since this saga all began, Nicola Sturgeon agreed to give her side of what's not just a story, but one of the biggest political scandals of recent times.
Nicola Sturgeon!
Nicola Sturgeon wasn't just the First Minister of Scotland and leader of the SNP. She was half of a political power couple. Her husband, Peter Murrell, was the party's chief executive. But in 2021, party officials started to ask questions about where cash raised by party members to fight for independence had gone. The SNP and Sturgeon denied anything had gone wrong. But soon, the police started to look into the finances. In 2023, Sturgeon, Murrell and the party treasurer were all arrested. Their house was searched, but only Murrell was charged.
How are you going to plead, Mr. Murrell?
This week, admitting he'd embezzled £400,000. So what did she know? And why on earth did it go so wrong? Everyone in the country is asking. Peter Murrell, your husband for many years, pled guilty to stealing £400,000 from the party that you led for many years. You've said you didn't know anything, but as the person who shared his life, as his wife, did you really not notice anything?
I absolutely didn't know that he was committing crimes. Look, I understand that question. It's human nature. If I was on the outside looking in on this happening to somebody else, it's very probably a question I would be asking too. You know, I think that question, though, is based on a lot of assumptions that are perhaps understandable, but are completely wrong. The first assumption is that I knew about all of the things that he was purchasing. There's a lot of the items that have been mentioned in the court documents and therefore by extension in the press that I wasn't aware of. Some of the items I was aware of, including things he bought for me as gifts and presented to me as gifts that he had bought for me. None of these things I would have looked at and thought, how on earth could he afford them? You know, we were two people on high salaries. We don't have children. We didn't have, an extensive social life, mainly because of the pressures of my job. We very rarely went on holiday. So we had incomes that would, as far as I could see, would have supported anything that I was seeing in my house. I think the other thing which, is just a fact of life, I was the First Minister of the country. I was working round the clock most days. I wasn't at home very often. I didn't take much, if anything, to do with the administration of our household. I mean, just to explain how our finances work, we had separate bank accounts. I never had any access to his bank account. He didn't have any to mine. Every month I would pass him a sum of money to cover my share of the household expenses and leave him to it.
But this was much more than the odd thing here or there or routine household items. Some of them were very basic. He even spent a few pounds on new toilet seats or a onesie. But he spent thousands of pounds on watches, thousands of pounds on pens, some of which you were pictured using, expensive handbags as gifts for you, thousands of pounds on several coffee machines.
Well,
These were a whole series of items that were far out of reach of the normal family.
We weren't a normal family. I was the First Minister of the country. Expensive watches. I never saw those watches. I until they were asked about in the context of a criminal investigation, I didn't know they existed. You mention a onesie. Never ever saw it. A coffee machine. We had a nice coffee machine in our house. We were on salaries that would not have made me question how we could have afforded a decent coffee machine.
And a lot of people might think, okay, it's not that unusual in a relationship that one person does the bills, one person looks after the money, and absolutely, you were very busy. But he bought a Jaguar car worth more than £80,000. That sat in your driveway. Did you never have a conversation about where you got the money for?
I didn't drive. I had no interest in cars. He bought a Jaguar. He wanted to change to an electric car. He told me that, you know, the range on the Jaguar was one that he thought was good. And I know a Jaguar is an expensive car, but we were on high salaries. If he had been, I don't want to be flippant about this, but if he'd been, you know, bringing Tiffany diamonds into the house or something, but there was nothing that I saw, there's been, in some of this, if it wasn't so awful and so serious, and I have seen people laughing about it, you know, a pepper grinder worth £2,000. Now, I genuinely don't know whether that is the pepper grinder that I was using in my house, but I also am genuinely not sure how I was meant to know it cost that amount of money. Now, I have been deceived, I've been lied to, I've been betrayed, as it turns out, over a lengthy period of time, by somebody I thought I knew, by somebody I loved, by somebody I trusted and had never been given any reason until the last 3 years to think that I couldn't trust. And
are you angry with him?
Am I angry with him? I don't even think that begins to cover it, because not only has he lied to me and betrayed me, and if this was an entirely private thing, that would be bad enough, but it's more than that. He has put me into a position of real peril. He has subjected me to public vilification, having the finger of suspicion pointed at me, you know, humiliation, allowed me to be seen on camera using things, wearing a piece of, and I can talk to you if you want about a particular piece of jewellery, because it deeply upsets me. I'm now in a position of even some of my birthday presents and Christmas presents have turned out to be a lie. And that's really difficult to come to terms with for anybody in private. But I'm doing this in the full glare of publicity, and I understand why. Because of his actions, I was subjected to a 2-year police investigation. I was exonerated. If there had been a shred of evidence that I had been complicit in this or had known about what he was doing, then I wouldn't have been cleared. But despite being cleared, I've still spent a week with having the finger of suspicion pointed at me. Yes, I'm angry, but I'm also carrying a degree of hurt and I think a degree of trauma about this whole episode. It resulted in me sitting in a police station under arrest. What he has done to me, I think, will take me a very, very long time to recover from.
Do you feel like you are a victim of his?
I'm a working class girl from the west of Scotland. I don't like victim terminology. I will never think of myself as a victim. The SNP is the victim in this crime. And
well, I was going to ask you about that necklace. You were pictured in that necklace on many, many occasions.
It was during the by-election in Shetland in 2019. I'd been campaigning a lot in Shetland, and we went to visit, as part of the campaign, we went to visit this amazing business, the Shetland Jewellers. And I was being shown around the shop, and I stopped at this pendant. I mean, you've seen pictures of it. It's beautiful. Later that night, Peter said to me, "I've got a surprise for you." And I saw you admiring this pendant and gave me it. Sorry. I loved that necklace and I wore it a lot. And this is the other thing. The idea that I would have gone about wearing things that I had known were anything other than what they were presented to me as, a gift from my husband, and to then find out that these were gifts given to me that he bought with the party's money causes a level of, I don't know, pain, bewilderment. I don't know, I'm not sure. I'm going to try. I'm just not sure I will ever properly come to terms with that.
But for all that time, you weren't just his wife. You were also the leader of the organisation that he was stealing from. And there's one item in particular, a motorhome worth more than £100,000. That motorhome was parked in your mother-in-law's drive for a long time. And yet you say you knew nothing about it. Did you visit your mother-in-law's house then in that period?
Less than a handful of times, probably.
So you walked past the motorhome?
No, I didn't. And this is the thing. My mother-in-law, or my mother and father-in-law's house, has a driveway in front of their house where we would park our car, and then we'd go into the house. Where the motorhome was round the side of the house, which is not immediately visible in the way that we went into the house. And it's between their house and the next door neighbour's house. Now, I genuinely don't have any conscious memory of seeing that motorhome. If I saw it, I probably would have assumed it was a neighbour's. My mother and father-in-law were in their mid-80s. It wouldn't have crossed my mind it was theirs, and it would never have, why would it have crossed my mind that it was the SNP's, that Peter had bought it?
Well, if you go to somebody's house, a family member, and there's a new vehicle parked in the drive, it's somewhere you go regularly.
The thing is, it wasn't a
normal thing to say, oh, that's it, or even to say, has your neighbour got a new motorhome? And it was never discussed?
Never.
Ever?
Never.
At all?
I genuinely do not recall seeing it in a way that I registered it and thought, oh, there's a motorhome.
What did you think it was when you saw in the SNP's accounts in 2021 that shows clearly tens of thousands of pounds being spent on motor vehicles for a political party?
That didn't register with me in the accounts. I would quite like to
seeing it?
I don't remember seeing it. The National Treasurer didn't draw it to my attention.
You don't recall seeing it in the accounts?
No, I don't. As a member of the NEC, as all of the members of the NEC, we would look at the National Treasurer would present them. The National Treasurer would, draw to our attention any items he thought we should pay particular attention to, and people in the NEC would ask questions. But no, I look back on this and think I wish I had sort of the thing about it. Wasn't from memory now that I've seen it. It doesn't say motorhome, it says motor vehicles. That could have been the rental of motor vehicles or something like that. So it didn't particularly jump out as something that caused me to question things.
Did you notice a drop in more than £300,000 in the party's accounts in 1 year?
The party's income goes up and down depending on whether it's an election year.
It's a drop of £300,000.
I don't know what year you're talking about.
2019.
But that would have been income related. That would have been to do with the income in terms of donations or the expenditure. Remember, we had snap elections during that point.
There's a bit of a clash though here, because as a fearsome politician, your reputation was for being completely fastidious across every detail. Some people actually even accused you of being a micromanager. But when it came to your party's accounts, well, it went up and down. You were looking, but you didn't notice things popping up in a big way.
That's always been the case. That is making it sound as if there was something glaringly suspicious in the accounts that I should have seen and I didn't. The financial position of the party, like all parties, will ebb and flow and go up and down. Again, and I am, the National Treasurer of the party was deceived and misled as well.
But you were the boss. I mean, you were the leader and you had a responsibility as that.
These accounts that you're talking about were audited by, professional auditors, by qualified accountants. I then rely on a National Treasurer to say he's satisfied with accounts for them to be put forward to the National Executive Committee. So the idea, and I want to seriously challenge this, of course there will be ebbs and flows in the party's financial position, but the idea there was anything in the accounts that would have alerted me to what Peter pled guilty to on Monday is absolutely, fundamentally untrue. And if there had been, I suspect the police and the Crown Office might have reached a different position on me.
But people were trying to flag to you that there was something going on with the finances. No, forgive me, let me ask you this question. 3 members of the Finance Committee had quit because they were worried about what was going on with the finances and unable to get the answers that they wanted. The Treasurer of the party then quit because he was worried and not able to get answers about the finances.
So
People were trying to alert the party to concerns about financial goings-on.
I reject completely the notion that people were trying to alert the party to the kind of behaviour that Peter pled guilty to on Monday.
That's not my question. People were alerting you and the SNP, some of them publicly, to concerns they had about the party's finances.
The concerns, but I want to talk
what did
specifically.
you do about that? Did you do anything about that as the party's leader?
The concerns were, and remember by this time there was a police investigation underway, so I also had to be careful that I was not doing anything to step on the toes of a police investigation. The police investigation started around, if memory serves me correctly, the spring of 2021. So by this time that these concerns were being raised, the police were looking into the SNP finances.
People quit because of concerns over finances. And then you told the party's ruling committee in March, there is no reason for people to be concerned. All of us need to be careful about suggesting that there is. You later then said in June 2021, money hasn't gone missing. The party then released a statement about people who quit over finances, claiming it was part of an ongoing dirty tricks campaign.
There was at that point
and like
a lot of politics.
Theories.
Again, until probably early 2023, there was no suggestion that what was being looked into in terms of the finances was potential embezzlement. The issue that was being looked into was whether the £600,000 that had been raised to fund a second independence referendum had been used for election campaigning. That's what my comments were about, that the party's underlying financial health was good and strong, and it was. And people were raising concerns in that context. The idea that I tried to stop them is not true. There was no occasion that somebody came to me and said, we're concerned that somebody is embezzling money from the SNP. And there was nothing ever in the accounts. If qualified auditors weren't able to see that when they approved the accounts, I'm not sure how I or the National Treasurer should have been able to see that. And yes, there are questions that you're asking me legitimately about how the party's finances were managed and the discussions around that. But none of that, absolutely none of that, explains or makes other people responsible for the fact that one man committed a crime.
It doesn't excuse his crimes, but there was a pattern that when repeatedly people were asking questions of you and the party, pushing for more transparency about how money was being spent, and they didn't get it.
I don't...
Do you wish you'd done it differently?
No, I don't accept that's true. Nobody, and this is where it has been made to sound like something it's not. This was not concerns about embezzlement of funds. This was concerns about we'd raise money for an independence referendum, and was it being used for election campaigning?
When did you begin to suspect that there had been wrongdoing?
Early in 2023, around about the spring, I think, of 2023, it became clear that some people who were being interviewed by the police were being asked not just about this issue of, referendum funding used for election campaigns, but there were questions being asked about the purchase of individual items.
At that point, did you discuss or confront your former husband about what had been going on?
When I found out about the camper van in early 2023, I asked him why on earth he'd bought a camper van. And the explanation I got then was that he'd bought it in advance of the 2021 election. The explanation was that because we still were under COVID restrictions and he didn't know the extent of the COVID restrictions that would still be in place during the campaign, he'd thought a camper van, would help get key communicators around the country if we weren't able to stay in hotels or whatever.
At what point did he admit to you that he had been breaking the law?
He told me sometime last week, the week before Monday, that he was going to plead guilty. But he has never really... I've not been at home. I haven't seen him I haven't seen him from the point he told me he was going to plead guilty until he pled guilty on Monday, because I wasn't able to, just emotionally wasn't able to deal with that. So he's never sat down and given me his account. Now, presumably, I will hear his account from the court at some point, but he's never given me an explanation.
Have you asked him for one?
Yeah, but he's never given it to me.
What does he say?
It's for him to speak for himself.
But are you sorry that during the time you were in charge, you didn't ask more questions about what was going on?
I am deeply sorry this has happened. But Peter went to, as we now know, great lengths to cover his tracks. For my own sake, but for the sake of people out there, a lot of women who end up finding themselves blamed for the actions of the men in their lives, I'm not going to contribute to that kind of sense that I am responsible for somebody else's crimes. I will take responsibility for the things I do, the decisions I make. I'm sitting here with you right now, answering questions because I believe strongly in that accountability. But I am not responsible for the crimes that my former husband committed, and I'm not going to apologise for somebody else's crimes.
But do you think you bear no responsibility for one of the biggest political scandals that took place on your watch as a leader of that party? That's a different thing to saying you're responsible for his crimes.
No, but it's not, because he perpetrated a crime on the SNP. By definition, that included me as the party leader. He misled, he deceived. He's serving and will be serving a sentence for a crime he committed. I'm out here feeling as if I'm serving a sentence for a crime I did not commit.
One of the things there's been a lot of discussion of this week was your decision to say no comment during hours of that police interview. You've been accused of doing that in the way that shows that you were trying to cover something up. But can you explain to people why you did that?
When I found myself arrested and being interviewed by the police, I was in a state of almost complete collapse. I was terrified, I was bewildered, I was in a state of high stress and anxiety. I instructed a lawyer, a very experienced lawyer, who told me that he was going to advise me to do the same as he advises every client in that situation, is to not answer the questions then in such a state of stress. In the aftermath of that interview, I prepared a very detailed written document answering the questions that had been put to me that was sent by my lawyer to both the Crown Office and the police in the summer of 2023. I heard nothing more. So the idea that I did not fully cooperate with the police is not true.
Should donors to the SNP whose money was spent criminally get their money back? And would you contribute to that in some way?
What do you mean, would I contribute to that in some way?
Well, you still have the asset of your marital home.
My marital home wasn't bought by SNP. There will now be, I would imagine, a legal process to recover the money from Peter that he embezzled from the SNP. So that will be a legal process. I am not guilty of that embezzlement, so nothing that belongs to me should be part of that. Rightly, it should not be part of that.
And are you now living your life differently?
Very. And that's probably all I'm going to tell you.
And you've been open before, too, about your sexuality, that you wouldn't put a label on it. Have you found a new relationship? Is that part of how you're living your life differently?
I mean, tempting though it is to grab the headlines of this interview with a personal revelation of that nature. No, I'm not in a new relationship. I am managing to live a different phase of life in a way that I am starting to find some peace and happiness. It's been a bit blown apart in the last week, but I am happier, or getting to the point where I feel happier.
And just finally, listening to you today, you've been very open about how hard this has been, and you've called it a trauma. But you also sound very defiant about your role in it all.
I didn't sit here meaning to be defiant, but I do feel really strongly that that's not right. That I'm a politician of many years standing. I should be held to account for the things I did and decisions I took, and you've done some of that today, and I've tried my best to explain the reality around these things. But I guess I do feel a little bit defiant. I've got a long road ahead of me in coming to terms with this and trying to heal the wounds that my ex-husband has inflicted on me, repair the damage he's done. And I'm probably in a very early stage of that. But I'm also determined. I think the word I would use about myself more than defiant is determined. I'm determined that this doesn't wreck my life. I'm determined that it doesn't stop me going on to do the things I want to do, that it doesn't stop me trying to find a bit of happiness in the next phase of my life. So if there is a bit of, to use your word defiance, my word determination, then it's better than lying in a crumpled heap, because there are times this week where it wouldn't have taken much for me to fall over into that crumpled heap, and I'm determined not to do it.
Nicola Sturgeon, thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thank you.
Well, that interview is on iPlayer and YouTube now if you want to look at it again. And our whole conversation of 55 minutes is available now on BBC Sounds in the newscast feed, where Nicola Sturgeon admits it was a mistake to keep her husband on as chief executive when she became leader. We press her in more detail about some of the party's accounts, and she tells me that, subject to legal advice, she would publish the full statement that she gave to the police. Well, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens next in this saga, and I suspect other politicians are still going to have questions for her. But Asma, watching that interview, what stood out to you?
I don't really know where to start with that, because it's like parallel lines, because you have a political story, and we know how, and quite rightly, people in this country post the expenses saga feel about politicians and money. And we understand that that's the political story, the lack of curiosity. But also running beside that, I'm afraid, is a very personal story about a marriage and how it was working or not working. Now, I know there's almost no space for that in politics, but, we are human beings. And I found a lot of what she was saying about the way that her household was run and the way that she had an incredibly busy job, I found that actually very convincing. The problem is that when you are, and you made this point, when you are the leader of a political party, when you are the leader of a country, and you have many, many enemies, as Nicola Sturgeon did and still does, you have to be across that detail. And I understand she was busy. She's explained all the individual purchases. She's explained about people raising concerns and saying, but they weren't raising concerns about embezzlement, they were raising concerns about funds. So I do believe actually what she's saying, but it wasn't good enough. She needed to have been more across the detail.
And Jeremy, the Conservative Party had its fair share of financial scandals. But when you listen to Nicola Sturgeon, they're talking specifically about how the money was working, the accounts, and it went up and down, and it was the Treasurer's job to flag things. Did you find her explanations good enough?
Not really, but the thing that made me angry in that interview was the way that she said the SNP was the victim. I think the real victim here is confidence in democracy, because people voted for the SNP in election after election, and now the chief executive of that party has been unmasked as a criminal. And, I could disagree with Nicola Sturgeon's views on independence or her policies that saw Scotland grow more slowly than England while she was First Minister, but this is far, far more damaging.
The interesting thing, though, Rosanna, is that actually the SNP did just win, I think it was the 5th victory in a row, even after all of this, although the case only concluded a few weeks after the election. So maybe people don't seem to have had their confidence knocked that much in the party despite this.
I think that watching your interview, people will change their mind quite significantly. But I think whatever Nicola Sturgeon knew or didn't know, the whole saga has hugely undermined confidence in politicians. And it does make it very difficult not to play the world's smallest violin for someone who hasn't noticed a Jaguar in the driveway or thought, Pete, we've got a new robotic lawnmower. Where's that come from? And I think the really important point here, and one which you sort of allude to, Laura, is the fact that the major political parties would be front page news. If it was a Labour politician, even a Conservative politician, they would be dragged backwards through a bush and hounded out of politics. Yet when it is the SNP, when we do have things like Nigel Farage and his £5 million donation that doesn't go answered. Things like that. It feels like all politicians should be held to the same level of account. It must be equal, and currently it isn't.
And just briefly, why did you think people would change their minds seeing that interview?
Because I think people expect the leader of a nation, particularly when, as you flagged in that interview, she was alerted to the fact that there were some financial challenges. You can't be that smart and be that level of leader without having your eyes on the detail. And I know and I respect the point that people's marriages and personal lives are very difficult, but you have to have an exorbitant amount of richness in your family not to notice £2,000 salt and pepper grinders that, quite frankly, should be going and retrieving the salt themselves and grinding it themselves for that amount of money.
Asma, what do you think the consequences of this are likely to be?
The consequence of what's happening to Nicola Sturgeon? Well, I mean, she's been cleared. So she feels she doesn't have a stain on her character. The problem is, of course, is that only 20% of people believe her. She will rebuild her life. The question you were asking about assets is a difficult one, in that there was some stuff about saying that she might, lose her marital home. I don't think that the SNP is going to be affected by this at all.
Well, we will see. Politics is always fascinating, human as well as professional. Well, whatever happens next in the SNP saga, the business of the UK government goes on. Ministers were set a task last week